Well, I have two questions for Dan Turrentine, who, of course, is the host of Two Ways Morning Meeting show, which is taking off. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But Dan is a Democrat. He has worked in capacities across professional sort of Democratic circles. And I want to ask him, what should Democrats be doing right now as we approach the 100-day mark of Donald Trump's second presidential administration? And why aren't Democrats doing what they should be doing? And I want to ask him about immigration. I want to ask him about Elon Musk, but I basically want to put that question to Dan. What should Democrats be doing, and why aren't they doing it? And Dan is really interesting because you should check out his Substack, but he's really interesting because he has great criticisms of the Democratic Party. He's not afraid to criticize his own party, but his criticisms are fresh and unpredictable and really smart. So as we're nearing this first 100 days of Donald Trump's second administration, that watermark, we've seen Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders draw big crowds. We've interviewed Dave Weigel, for example, when he came back from one round of that tour. We've talked about it a lot here. On the other hand, there's some people in the Democratic Party that are not happy with AOC and Bernie Sanders assuming the leadership role in this era of quote-unquote resistance. So what's the right answer? What should Democrats be doing? Why aren't they doing it? Let's bring in Dan now to talk through this extremely important question if the party hopes to rebuild during the second Trump administration. Dan, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start actually just with what you're doing at Two Way, because I think it speaks volumes about where we are as a country, about the media ecosystem. I haven't seen anything grow this fast. We were talking before we started taping in a very long time. So first of all, congratulations. But I wanted to ask also why you think it's growing so quickly. Is it speaking to some demand?
Well, we hope there's a demand and an increasingly growing demand. You know, I think it was Mark Halperin, who I work closely with, was really the brains behind the idea of what is essentially 21st century talk radio, where we interact with viewers, but we have an ethos of peace, love, and understanding. And the bet was that there's plenty of places to go if you want tribal cheerleading. If you want to hear that, Trump is the greatest thing ever, there's a whole bunch of outlets. And if you want to hear that, he's Hitler, there are lots of outlets that will serve that up. He wanted a place where there would be a respectful conversation from both sides, where you would kind of listen and try to hear. You may not like what you hear, but you would at least respect and understand it. And thankfully people, when they come on, always say, like, it's just so refreshing to be able to do this where, we can laugh at each other. We can be self-deprecating, meaning how our party is doing, where we're at fault, where we're, finding some success, but not get, too heated about it. And also just listen to what people have to say, where they can share their point of view. We won't judge them. We won't tell them they're bad or good, but just listen. And what, we found all fall, or what we heard, ended up matching what kind of ended up happening on election day. And so sometimes it's better to be a little lucky than good.
So interesting. One more question on that, actually. It's the talk radio parallel it seems dead on, but there's also something interesting about having people's faces. That is a truly new dynamic. I wonder if you think that makes people even more inclined to peace, love, and understanding, that you're seeing across the screen, of course, but the other person in full human form, flesh and blood, as you're having these conversations.
It's a really smart point, and I think we absolutely would say it's true. It's just human nature. It's harder to be snarky or mean face to face than it is certainly on X or, on what was the telephone back in the day with talk radio. You just, when you're looking somebody in the eye and they're smiling back at you, even though you want to say, gosh, I hate what your party's doing on this or something of that nature. If the person's smiling back at you, you're maybe a little softer and a little more willing to kind of respectfully listen than just flamethrow.
I want to ask about the Kilmore-Abrego-Garcia case, but also the general response Democrats have had. And you've probably picked up on just sentiments as you've been having these conversations with your own audience over the course of the last few weeks. But the response from Democrats, let me test out a theory. It would have been interesting to see Democrats actually try to outdo Trump on this need to get rid of people who are probably not the best candidates for citizenship or whatever it is. And I'm not talking specifically about Kilmore Abrego Garcia, but you could see a different world in which Democrats didn't go to El Salvador and said what Trump is doing is wrong, and it's wrong because it's making it harder to deport people who shouldn't be in the country because it's getting things tied up in the court system, and there was a more efficient way to do it, something like that. What is your, I know you have an interesting take actually on how Democrats have handled this. What is your take on why they went to El Salvador and sort of were waving the Abrego Garcia flag?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a fascinating issue because it combines so many different currents in the party and problems. I think that when the party first started saying, hey, look, this guy wasn't supposed to be deported. The court instructed that he not be deported to El Salvador back in 2019. Supreme Court, ruled that he wasn't supposed to be deported either. They were on fairly good ground, right? Like you're just kind of, hey, Trump's a little out of control. They're moving very fast. Like a mistake was made. I think people thought if you're going to try to round up 20 million people, there are going to be mistakes. And I know people in the party who thought, let's just wait, right? When it happens, like we'll pounce. I think when Trump, he is such a smart politician, started talking about the person, right? Let's humanize this guy, so to speak. The party couldn't help itself, right? It just knee-jerked. If Trump says he's good, or in this instance, bad, we're going to say he's good. We're going to say basically he's Ward Cleaver and try to make you think that the guy is like the all-American dad at Little League, a Maryland man, like all of this. And I think that's where they began, we have failed a lot of common sense tests recently. And I think this is one of those instances where the party just couldn't help itself, flying down to El Salvador and kind of getting into these debates of, well, he may be a gang member, but you don't have proof that he is, that he's committed a crime. Like that is not the place that you want to be trying to argue in politics. What I will say, though, is really fascinating about this is it definitely, I think, has not been good for Democrats. It's exposed, our kind of cultural detachment, the common sense failings. Immigration as a rule still totally divides the party, for which we really have no solutions. That said, I don't think this has been good for Trump either. And I think if you just look at the polling, his numbers have come down across the board. I think the tariff fiasco has a lot to do with that. But nevertheless, he's now kind of underwater or barely at break even on immigration. And the few polling outfits, including the Washington Post here breaking this morning or on Friday morning, that asked the specific question, should Garcia be kept in El Salvador or returned? It's like 50% on almost every poll say he should be brought back. And it's around 30% say he should remain in El Salvador. So I do think that the sense of like chaos and kind of out of control nature of Trump, this has played into that. So I actually think both sides have not come out good on this debate.
Yeah, interesting point. And I'm curious why you think it is Democrats are not able to unite on a common sense immigration policy, because it's so, deporting people who shouldn't be here is popular with the American public. And then you hear Democrats like yourself in media conversations say, yep, like we can all agree on this point, but it seems like it's almost impossible for the party. We got some good votes for the Laken Riley Act, even though I even think that was a slightly problematic bill, but people ended up supporting it, and it reminds me of what Republicans went through on Obamacare, repeal and replace, but there was no agreement on the replacement. Why is it on immigration that Democrats can't just come together on the common sense point of deportations?
By the way, that is a great analogy, Obamacare. The biggest fissure in the party is between the very progressive base that sees that if you give an inch on immigration, you're going to lose miles. So you cannot admit to any, idea that we should, let's say, go after illegal immigrants who are or were criminals, in their home country or here. Forget 80-20, that's like 95-5. Like it is overwhelmingly positive. If you said to any parent, do you worry about, crime on your street? I live in New York City. 100% they do. Do you worry about the, parking lots full of people just kind of mulling around and kind of kids loitering in the summer? Absolutely. The moderates, and I think they're, some of them are thinking of running for president, see, like, we have to solve this problem. And it's not a border, state issue anymore. Every single city in the country, every area sees this and has these problems. I think there were Democrats who thought that this was the way to win the Latino vote. Now, that has proven to be completely ridiculous. Like, we are losing with Latinos. In 2020, I think had Trump won, one of the biggest stories would have been the inroads he made with Latinos that were very apparent. And if you listen to focus groups over and over again, there were two big things that you heard from Latinos. One, a lot of them that came from South America and Central America said they left their home country partly because of urban chaos, the sense of crime, and they associated Democrats after a lot of the social unrest of the summer of 2020 with being okay with this kind of out of control nature of, or I should say, not cracking down when people were lawless, right? And then the other thing was economic opportunity, where they saw these kind of the Democratic Party as giving handouts that did not apply to them. And they frankly didn't want it. They just wanted the opportunity to kind of like go do their thing and try to build a business or whatnot. And so the data screams that the reason that we thought we were appealing to Latinos was fundamentally wrong. And to the working class, white, black, or whomever, it is just like, like, we're not comfortable with just open borders and asylum seekers and kind of allowing all these people to flood into the country. And when the party thinks about a forward-looking agenda, it's going to have to address this issue. We can't keep saying, which Biden tried to say, it isn't an issue.
And just peeling another layer back here, why is it do Democrats seem to think that they can't give an inch? Because I agree with you. I think that's a really important point here. So why is it that, I mean, is it because Trump is such a singularly polarizing figure that if you're torn between turning out your base and trying to persuade people that maybe you lost to Trump, if you give him an inch, it looks like maybe weakness, and then you alienate your own base and can't get them to turn out in midterms or special elections? Like, what is the reason that people feel that way?
I really think, and it makes me somewhat sad, it's Trump derangement syndrome. The majority of the party hates the man so much. It goes back to 2015 when he came down the escalator and he had that first press conference. He shocked their sensibilities. Right. It was both his agenda, right? The idea of we're going to get out of or redo trade deals, right? Well, people are like, wait, no, the world is flat and we're all interconnected. And like Bill Clinton had conditioned us and Obama to, trade and needing to work with other countries and markets. It was the immigration issue. Again, just this idea that, immigrants were a future voting bloc, that they were naturally, friendly to us. And so I think the thought was, and still is on many issues, that if we say Trump is right, just start that sentence. It just half the party's head explodes and shuts you down. My own family, this is an issue. If I think Trump is very politically talented. I think he's right on some issues. When I say that, both at the Thanksgiving table and just in general, there are members of my family who just immediately say no, like just absolutely not. The guy is terrible. And I think one of the reasons Democrats have kind of slid so far backwards, immigration is a good example. Robert F. Kennedy trying to ban food dyes.
Yeah.
Like, it is so popular with moms and dads and just people with children. And, people have had health issues recently. And yet we can't bring ourselves, just like the little boy at the State of the Union address who was being recognized for battling cancer and being given a Secret Service badge. It's just like we can't stand up and applaud, whether it's a, kind of prop figure, for lack of a better term, or a substantive policy. The party just cannot bring itself to it. And what it doesn't recognize is, for a lot of Americans who they like some things about Trump and they really don't like other things about Trump, but they like us even less. And elections are choices, and more people are choosing the alternative.
Right, which just seems so impossible to people in sort of Acela corridor bubbles, that people could like Democrats less than Trump. It's hard to like wrap your head around because he's just Trump. But on that note, actually, talk to us more about the Maha example, because you wrote about this on your Substack recently, and I'm curious, maybe for this particular angle, how could Democrats talk? Like, how do you say no to RFK Jr. while saying yes to sort of the goals of RFK Jr. Like, I remember his confirmation hearing, Bernie Sanders, somebody who was fully aligned with this man, basically, maybe not on vaccines, but on almost everything.
A lot.
This guy was too far left for Obama to put in as his EPA head. And Bernie Sanders is smearing him and leading the confirmation hearing with these attacks rather than, you could still attack him. You don't have to lead with it. So maybe that's a leading question, Dan, but how should they message their opposition to RFK Jr.?
See, I actually think one of the big challenges for the party is we've got to win him back into the tent.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I think one of our problems is we drove him away, right? I mean, it obviously was over challenging a sitting incumbent. But then, like, we went further. I mean, we really tried to ostracize him and kind of put him in a real strict penalty box for, like, how dare you do this? And you're not a team player. And I think what I've learned from doing the morning meeting and working on two-way since September, I was unaware of the power of this movement to address food safety, to all the people who have stories of long COVID. And, I'm a believer in vaccines. I'm a believer in science. I have taken the COVID vaccine and, several boosters. But I respect people who say, and I actually have some family members that they've never been the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm empathetic and sympathetic that I believe Dr. Fauci and science tried to do their best under the circumstances in a crisis. But where our party has faulted is we have not said mistakes were made. Whether it was shutting down schools, we have 4 children. One of them didn't go to school for 18 months because his school was closed. He was trying to learn to read. He got really far behind. Now, we're incredibly fortunate that we could provide external resources to catch him up. It took 2.5 years to catch him up. But on things like food safety and just questioning whether certain things like certain vaccines have worked, the party, it is black and white. It is, no, you're wrong. You're a Neanderthal if you think this way. You're crazy. It doesn't fit with, as you say, the Acela corridor way to think about things. And that is where, like, I can't believe this. Donald Trump went into November being seen as more likable, being seen as more open-minded, as being seen as more caring about people like you. I mean, you go on and on about, the old classic, who do you want to have a beer with? Like, just human nature. Who do I trust? Who do I like? Who speaks for me? Who represents me? A guy who, is a billionaire, whose history is, basically born on third base, that our party has so offended and turned off people that Donald Trump, very smartly said to RFK, I see your power. Let me extend my hand. This is your movement? Yeah, okay. We're going to name it Maha. You want to go after this stuff? Yeah, okay. Like, I'm good with that. You could say, all right, it's inauthentic, but Trump is smart like that. And our party has got, if we're going to be a Big Tent coalition, we've got to get people like RFK to come back into the party to say, I have a place. We don't agree with you on everything, but questioning institutions, questioning, how do we make things better? That used to be the Democratic Party, right? We used to take on big interests proudly. Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, Kennedy, even Bill Clinton to some extent, was unafraid to say we're going to deregulate or we're going to, he, at the time it was free trade, now not so much, but I wish the party would be more open-minded.
Yeah. Elon Musk is a gift to Democrats in some ways. I'm curious actually for your thoughts on this. Another person who, actually left sort of being a part of the Democratic coalition, but I'm curious what you make of Alyssa Slotkin, who's being definitely seen and is positioning herself to be seen as a leader to sort of lead Democrats out of the wilderness. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are drawing tens of thousands of people in some red pockets of the country, by the way, to what has been dubbed the Fighting Oligarchy Tour. And Alyssa Slotkin says nobody knows what oligarchy means. That's not good branding. And yet tens of thousands of people are showing up. So here we have this war where the populists are getting, butts in seats at rallies. The centrists, who are, I would argue, right about some of the cultural issues, the political effectiveness of the cultural issues, and I would obviously argue the moral effectiveness, they are not having an easy time coming together. But maybe
Yep.
Elon Musk is the gift that brings both sides together. What do you make of that, Dan?
Well, I think Elon Musk, I'm so curious how history is going to judge his brief experience in politics here, 6, 12 months from now, because I think what the history of Doge is, I still don't know, and I follow this pretty closely, what is real and what's not. I mean, I feel like even their own website deletes stuff, changes stuff, like you're not really sure. Winning coalitions appeal to both the Bernie Sanders wing and the moderate wing. I think what is happening is fantastic. We need this Darwinian tension to break out. Like, one of the questions is, where does the Bernie Sanders energy go? Because part of it went to Trump in 2024. The Sanders voter is not too dissimilar from the RFK voter, who's not too dissimilar from the MAGA voter. And we have been hemorrhaging these voters. Sanders is too old, I think, to run again, and he's kind of indicated the same thing. So what happens to that movement? It appears that AOC is picking up the mantle. I think AOC is actually a pretty talented politician. I don't agree with some of the cultural stuff that she talks about and kind of some of her message. But I think it is fantastic that she is unafraid. She is nimble. She is in your face. I think it's good. We need more kind of, flamethrowers and front of foot members like her. At the same time, I love Elise Slotkin. I think she is great. I think that the story that was published either Thursday night or Friday morning about kind of she is going to lean into more this. I think it's like we can't be weak and woke. We have got to move on. We have got to kind of be, tougher. We've got to be more direct to voters. That is great. Now, what she didn't say and what the big missing gap is for both AOC and Slotkin, and I'll put Shapiro and Whitmer in that kind of Slotkin pragmatic bucket a little bit, is neither has an agenda of what we are for. Both are saying, here's where Trump is wrong. Here's where, let's say, the Democratic Party is wrong. But the last piece to the puzzle is going to be to kind of crystallize a set of policies to offer the American people. In 2006, when George W. Bush had Hurricane Katrina, the Iraq War was going south, people forget that it was then Rahm Emanuel running the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and Chuck Schumer running the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, got together and came up with what they called 6 for '06. It was 6 ideas that if you gave us power back, we were going to try to enact to make your life better. And they were largely small. I mean, George W. Bush was still president, but it said to people, okay, it's not just that Bush stinks, but I kind of get it. And this would work for me if they did it. Harris never went there in 2024, right? She had these super small ball policies. I believe that what is happening is good. I think that by the end of this calendar year, you're going to start to see some people put some meat on the bone as the Slotkins of the world travel, as AOC kind of, I think, gets some more courage to start actually assuming this mantle that is now pretty apparent is hers, and then take it to the voters. I think one of the best things that's happening are primary challenges. I think it's awesome.
Interesting. That's a big debate.
These younger, yeah.
So you think that the David Hogg approach you think is a good one, and that's healthy?
I think that David Hogg as a DNC official should not be doing that. It's fine to say the DNC is not going to take a stand on primary, campaigns, which is basically saying to the incumbent, good luck to you. I think that there are so many members that have been there forever who are more concerned about getting a good reservation at a good restaurant in Washington, D.C., who do not help their colleagues very much. I was a chief of staff on Capitol Hill 11 years ago. I sat through tutorials given to members on how to use, at the time, Facebook. And I might as well have been listening in Greek, which I don't speak. These members were baffled. They were confused. And a lot of them are still there, and they're 10 years older.
Right.
And so we need candidates who have energy, who come out of their communities now and could say, these are the problems in my community. This is what angers people, as opposed to, I've been in Congress for 20 or 30 years, and I can tell you what's bothering people on Capitol Hill or DuPont Circle or all these neighborhoods in DC where I spend, 10 out of the 12 months of the year. So I think it is great. If you're an incumbent, you shouldn't fear this. If you've done your job, if you're in tune with your district, if you're home a lot, if you have something to say, if you're representing, the values and the desires of your district, you won't lose. But if you're detached, you will and you should.
Dan, this has been so interesting. Thank you for stopping by and sharing these insights with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Well, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you download your podcasts, and you can get a premium edition of the show over at undercurrents.tv. We get a weekly newsletter sent to you guys there, a private email address, and of course, private episodes of the show that are just for our premium subscribers. It was great to have Dan here. I really am so impressed with Two Way, with Morning Meeting, and what they've been able to build is growing so fast. And I think probably because people are, we talked about this actually in the Konstantin Kisin episode last week, people are really hungry for debate and discussion, not in the old like crossfire theatrical way, but they just kind of want to talk through these things. It's harder to find people who disagree with you because we've ended up kind of siloing ourselves. And so it's a space. I think the success of the space is because it's a type of space that people are really hungry for. Not everyone. Obviously, there are some of us who are really comfortable in bubbles and feel really kind of confident in, maybe the way that we see the world and aren't super interested in hashing it out. And, different strokes for different folks. But I'm one of those people, and I think there are a lot of people like this who are seeking out debate and discussion right now because it's hard to find people that we trust who are, quote unquote neutral. So if I want to listen to a Democrat, open Democrat, make his case, then I also want to hear someone who disagrees make their case, maybe from the left, maybe from the right. But the more that we can sort of compare and contrast, I think the closer to the truth we're going to get. And a lot of people just don't trust that sort of efficient approach of just having someone who is neutral give you the best explanation and the truth, because that's failed so many times. And there have been so many bad actors who have claimed that mantle of neutrality and misled us, either intentionally or unintentionally. It's been a lot of both. So I think it's really interesting, and Democrats are grappling with that right now too, as they try to take back the podcast space, try to learn from why they lost people like Joe Rogan. And hey, Dan said, good for AOC. Even if you don't agree with her on all those cultural issues, she's showing there's fight in the Democratic Party. And there are two words to describe that I think are important for politicians to succeed politically. I'm not talking about morally, although this applies to that as well. Those two words are moral clarity. You need to have a sense of moral clarity, confidence in your belief, confidence in your policy, confidence in your values. That is attractive to others because it doesn't look milquetoast. It doesn't look sort of Romney-esque, wishy-washy. I'm just going along to get along with what sounds pleasant and allows me to succeed at any given sort of epoch in American politics. You have to have moral clarity, and with moral clarity comes that fight. So, really interesting conversation with Dan. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll be back here with more Undercurrents soon.